everybody. My name is Caron Kinsey Prideaux with Klein Properties, and I'll be your host today. And we are demystifying financial planning and estate planning. Climb on board for all the financial aspects of real estate. With me today, we have Neil Tyra, and Mr. Tyra is a financial planner here in Rockville area. As well, we have Darren Straniero, who is a certified financial planner as well. So I'm going to ask both of you to give yourselves a little bio for the audience.
Great. Well, again, my name is Neil Tyra, and technically I'm not a financial planner. Technically, I'm an attorney. Well, not technically, I am an attorney. I'm an attorney who focuses primarily on estate planning, which is an aspect of financial planning, but it has to deal with what you can do to preserve all the things that you earn through your hard efforts, preserve for you and your family when you pass away. So that's what an estate planner does. Law is my fourth career, so I come by this opportunity by a circuitous route. I initially started off cooking for a living, and then I built hardware and software systems for the government for many years, and I owned and operated a martial arts studio, and then I became an attorney. So I like to say that I've gone the circuit, the lap of hard knocks to learn what life is all about and why you want to preserve your assets using a financial planner such as Darren and an estate planner such as myself.
Thank you.
Darren Straniero, and so I'm the owner of OnePlane Financial Advisors, and so been doing this, gosh, I have to think 2008, what's the math on that, 13 years. So I went out on my own almost 3 years ago. I worked for a large financial services company for the, 8-10 years prior to that, and just wanted to work more with people directly and not be associated with product sales that working at a large financial services company can entail. So I work primarily with people that are 35 to 55 years old, married with kids, not unlike myself. I have a good understanding of what that's like because we have 5 kids in our house.
Wow.
18, 12, twin girls are 11, and our baby boy just turned 10 on Tuesday. So no more double digits in our house. And so, working with people like Neil, accountants, just to make sure that people's financial lives are taken care of, because it can be very easy to neglect a lot of this stuff. We're busy. And so what I do is I help people, I manage their financial lives so they can focus on other more meaningful areas of their lives.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for being here today.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Neil, this question would be directed more towards you at this point in time. What is estate planning that you went and discussed briefly? And maybe how does that differentiate from what we call probate?
Well, it's a really good question because people oftentimes confuse the two. So estate planning is the process you go through to set up the legal instruments that will then preserve the assets that you have, that you've earned. So it keeps the house in the family, keeps the money that you've earned in the family, or directs it to where you want it to go. When you reach that point where, sadly, we all do at some point in our lives, when the time comes. So that's what the process of estate planning is. After you pass, then the probate process starts typically. And the probate process is one in which you petition the court to get the authority to do what the will says. Okay? So the will in and of itself doesn't give you the authority. It's just the directions that the decedent wants to leave behind. You still need a court to give you that legal authority to disseminate those assets. And that's called the probate process. And so there's always a tension between the planning aspect of trying to preserve your assets and dealing with what the court's going to make you go through. That tension becomes significant enough that some people look for ways to avoid involving the court altogether. And so there are strategies and techniques that one can use to keep the assets you've earned outside of the probate process. So a young couple that such as Darren might work with, if they're savvy, they can structure their estate such that all the assets that they own would not go through the will, and instead would either pass as a result of declaring a beneficiary and that you want the money to go to, or through the process of owning the property jointly. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's the difference between estate planning and the probate process. And the top level decision that people need to make is, when you do an estate plan, do you want an estate plan that's based on using the will as the centerpiece? Or more and more people are choosing these days to use something called a revocable trust as the centerpiece of their plan. So you'll hear those two terms being used back and forth. Do I use a will or do I use a trust? And it's usually a pretty significant question.
Well, that actually segues nicely to my next question, which was, what are the different types of trust and how do we differentiate between them, and what situations would one encounter a revocable versus irrevocable?
Yeah, so it's a pretty complex question. So let's talk just briefly about what is a trust.
Okay.
So trust came about actually during the Crusade era. And so when the feudal lord would go away to fight the Crusades, he wanted someone to take care of his property, and if he should not come back, wanted to determine where that property was going to go. And so they built a trust, and what the trust does is it transfers ownership of the property into the trust that's administered by an individual that's called a trustee. And they have to follow the instructions that the grantor, the person who created the trust, they have to follow their instructions as to what they want done with that property. And that's what we have now. The typical trust that most people use is something called a revocable living trust. And by revocable, it means it can be changed. They can update it, change it, add to it, delete from it. And so you create a trust. The grantors create a trust. They normally name themselves as the first or initial trustee. And the beneficiary of that trust is normally themselves. So it's a legal instrument where you move all your property into the trust. You still own it because you're the trustee of the trust, and you still benefit from it because you're also the beneficiary of the trust. Now, later on down the road, you can name a successor trustee who would take over that responsibility if you become incapacitated, and ultimately what would happen to the assets in the trust when you pass. And the beauty of an instrument like that is it's a private document. It's a contract between all the people involved. It does not involve the court. So for those people who want to avoid going through the probate process, that's what they do. They use revocable trust. Now there's other types of trusts. Irrevocable, and you can't change it. There are certain reasons why you might want to use an irrevocable or irrevocable trust. And one that has a near and dear point in my life is a supplemental needs trust. And this is when you have somebody who's handicapped in some fashion, disabled in some fashion, and are receiving government means tested benefits. In other words, they determine whether or not they qualify for government benefits. A supplemental needs trust, or an SNT, is a vehicle by which you can put assets in it, and it can provide benefits to that disabled person without jeopardizing their government benefits. So it's a way of keeping their benefits and benefiting from a trust. So those are the three typical trusts.
And all of these would need an attorney to set up.
They do.
in
They
place.
do need an attorney to set up. And the supplemental needs trust has some other restrictions upon it. It has to be approved by the state. There's certain things you have to do to earn that special status.
So it can only really happen after the person is in that needs
Situation.
category.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Darren, maybe you can help shed a little light on how we go about choosing a financial advisor or financial planner such as yourself? What are some of the characteristics that our audience should be looking for when choosing someone?
Right. I think the first thing is you have to like that person, right?
Yeah.
And then probably trust them, right? But that trust is going to be earned over time. So how do we find somebody that is going to be trustworthy? So I think where a lot of people start now is they ask, right? I say, hey, Caron, I'm looking for a financial planner or a financial advisor. Who do you use, right? So that's one way that people would find a financial planner or a financial advisor. Google is very popular right now, so you could even search financial advisors near me, financial planners near me. That's another way. And then that's going to lead you to some search results generally. And so what are we going to be looking for? So you're going to be looking for, I think the first thing that you want to look for is that person a fiduciary? Meaning, will they always have your best interests in mind? All right, are they obligated through professional designations to act in your best interest at all times? So I would start there. And then, understanding how that person is compensated is also important. It's not the end all be all though, okay? Because there are, as in every profession, there are bad apples. Mm-hmm. And so you just have to be comfortable with how they get compensated. So if somebody is commission only, doesn't make them a bad person. But if you're doing a financial plan with somebody who you aren't paying for that plan, mm-hmm. then guess who the product is? You are the product, right? And so that's, again, not a bad thing, right? Everybody has their own comfort level, but just understanding that. So if I was saying, hey, Caron, you're looking for a financial planner, I would start with NAPFA, the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, right? So those are going to be fee-only advisors that also have the Certified Financial Planner designation and are members of that association. Start there. They have a search function. Depending on your age, excuse me, XY Planning Network is also an association for financial planners that typically work with Generation X, Generation Y, millennials, and even some Gen Zs as they're starting to get in there. And they're also going to be fee-only certified financial planning professionals. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you could go to cfp.net, which is for the Certified Financial Planning Association. You can find a planner there as well. But, you want to interview. Just like anything else, I think it's best practice to talk with 2 or 3 and find somebody that you can know, like, and trust. And even maybe if you are specialized, right? Maybe you're a doctor, right? Or an attorney. Maybe you find a financial planner that specializes in working with what it is that you do, because he or she is going to be very proficient in understanding what your life looks like, not only financially, but, the things that you're going to deal with as a physician or, whatever it is that you do. So that's where I would go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I know that my husband had remarked that he didn't really want to choose. We just recently got married.
Mm-hmm. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And we are a little outside of your age group, so, but we don't know who to go to. And he said he didn't want to go to somebody who was selling him something all the time.
Right.
To your point.
Yeah.
So
you would want to find a fee-only advisor.
A fee-only.
Right.
Okay.
And you can even break that down to somebody so a fee-only means that there's no commissions, they have no products to sell, they get compensated directly by their clients.
Like a consultation fee.
Exactly, right. So if you go down into fee-only, you have, what they would call an advice-only advisor. And this is somebody who's going to say, Caron, and I'm sorry, your husband's name is?
Mike.
Okay, so Caron and Mike, these are my recommendations, right? You pay that person for perhaps a full financial plan, and they give you the recommendations, and now it's on you to implement, right? And so that would be an advice only. They're just going to strictly give you the advice. They're not going to manage any money for you. They're not going to, pull any strings or levers or pick stocks and bonds on your behalf. They're just going to tell you what to do, and you go do it.
That's probably where he was going with that.
That's very popular with what we would call the DIY investor. Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
Can you have a hybrid?
You can.
So you have a financial planner who does both fee or advice only.
Yeah.
As well as investment.
So I would probably fall under the hybrid model because I'm a flat fee financial planner. So all of my clients pay the same fee. It's on an annual basis. And so I can manage your assets for you, and that is included in my annual fee, or I have clients that prefer to do it on their own. And so, but we still talk about what the investment should look like, and then it's on them to go and implement. And then I make sure that they actually do implement, because that's the hardest part, right?
Sure.
I mean, Neil, you probably experienced that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Procrastination.
Here's the deed. Go record it with the county. Get that house in the trust, and then a year later they haven't done it yet, right? Yeah.
Right.
So you want to make sure that if you're that it just gets done, right?
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
And for us that are a little bit outside of your age group, do you
It's-
still look at us?
Yeah, sure.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Just want to make
I
sure.
like to work with
It's not
people.
a hard stop.
I always look for people that I like, right?
Okay.
Just like you want to like me,
Sure.
I want to like you as well, right? Because so I don't do any hourly or project based,
Right.
So I'm, the cheesy dating cliche, financial planner seeks long term relationship with clients.
in
right?
search of.
Yeah.
In search of.
Yeah.
Real
Mhm.
estate brokers
Yeah.
the same way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for that.
of course.
Well, one thing that leads us to the real estate question
Mm-hmm.
is, and you might be able to answer this more so, is when you have a lender, for example, tells
Mm-hmm.
you, well, you're really approved up to 750,000, and you look at your spouse and you're like, no way, right? We're not buying a house that much. How do we go about in terms of that? What's the difference between how much we can afford or should buy?
Right. So let's just use 750,000
Yeah.
as an example, right? So how much does this client make? You tell me how much they make.
They make 150,000.
Okay, 150,000. Okay, so the lender in some instances will let them borrow up to or have what's known as a debt to income ratio, right? So up to, in some instances, including all of their debt, cars, loans, credit cards, any debt that they have, up to 50%, right? So think about that. They could be in debt up to $75,000, right? So let's say that this particular person does that, right? They borrow enough house and take a big enough loan to combine with all their other debts that their debt load every year is $75,000. So now that leaves, they make 150, that leaves $75,000. Of course, they have to pay tax on the 150,000,
Of course.
right? But now they have to live. Do they have kids? Do they have daycare? Right? This is crazy, right? Now, what are they going to sleep on? Boxes, and
Right.
they can't. So when we borrow, at an income like that I would say that would be way too much house for sure for them, and I don't even know that they would qualify for it. But my rule of thumb is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance should not be more than 20% of your gross annual income. So for this particular client at $150,000 household income, right, that's going to be $30,000. So their loan plus taxes plus insurance should not be more than annually $30,000 a year. Now that leaves them $120,000. Right, so now they can still save appropriately, because we can't forget about savings. Right, got to put money in the bank. They can protect their balance sheet and their house, and they can do all that. And they probably still can live a pretty nice life if they're just watching and making sure. So we want to understand that the lenders, right there, they want to make as much money as they can on the interest on that
Right.
loan. So they're going to let you get up to as much as they feel comfortable with the risk of your profile. But we want to make sure that we're managing our own risk and not putting too much emphasis in one area or the other. As soon as we get too high above that 20%, then it starts to lead to deficiencies. Maybe we're not saving as much, we're not able to to protect our balance sheet, or our lifestyle suffers and we run up some credit card debt
Right.
because we're outrunning our life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good points, all. Thank you for
You're
that.
welcome.
Neil, come back to you. What are the Maryland federal inheritance tax rules, either now, currently, or coming down the pike in 22?
Yeah, so taxes are always something that people are concerned about when they're talking
Amen.
about doing
Absolutely.
their estate plan. And I got good news and bad news.
I'll take the good news
The
first.
good news is, so you have estate tax. Okay? So when a person dies, their heirs have to pay taxes on their estate, and the amount of taxes that they pay is determined by how big their estate is. So the larger the estate, the larger the tax burden. However, you have both federal tax and state tax. So you have federal estate tax and you have state estate tax. Now, Maryland is one of the very few jurisdictions that has a state estate tax. The vast majority of states in the country don't have a state-based estate tax. Okay? The good news is, for some people, from the federal perspective, you're exempt from having to pay tax unless your estate exceeds a certain level. So way down on the low end, if your estate is worth, say, $100,000, you're not going to have to pay any estate tax on that. Okay? What do you think the threshold is right now
For federal?
for federal?
I might
How
know
about,
that.
Yeah.
how about 15 million?
You're very
Very
close.
close.
Very close. A tad over 11 million for
11
an
million.
individual.
Okay.
Okay. In years past, it was lower than that. It was raised to 11 million for an individual, 22 million for a couple.
Okay.
Okay.
For a couple
And
for what? For
they're
inheriting?
No, they're exempt from having to pay estate tax.
Okay.
So what happens is when each of you has 11, and when one of you passes, you use some of your 11 to exclude having to pay estate tax on your portion of the estate. Your unused portion is then ported over to your surviving spouse.
Oh,
So instead of 11, they may now have $15 million
okay.
exemption. So you can see how some people are looking at that and saying, wow, that's effectively no tax at the federal level.
At the federal level.
Because the vast majority of people
Don't have estates
Yeah.
that high, right?
And so I always get a chuckle when I talk to new clients and I ask them a threshold questions. And let me ask you something. If we took everything you owned and we liquidated it, we turned it into a big mountain of cash, would we have a mountain of cash larger than $11 million? Well, when they stop laughing, most of them, then we can get down to business. So that's the good news. Now, Maryland, with its own state tax, they have an exemption as well. It's not quite as big as the federal tax exemption. It's a tad over 5 million. So basically, you can say, if my estate is less than 5 million, I'm not going to pay state estate tax here in Maryland, and I'm not going to pay federal estate tax. If it's between 5 and 11 million, I'm going to pay a little for the state, still nothing for federal. Okay? If it's over 11 million, then I'm paying everybody.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, will that change? Probably. It's likely that they're going to bring the federal exemption down. How far down? Well, Maryland's used to be tied with the federal number. So, but the federal and Maryland were 5 million. So I'm thinking that if it does come down, it's going to come down closer to the Maryland level, and Maryland may go up a bit, but still, it's a pretty significant exemption. So, I think the concern or the worry about having to pay a state tax is unfounded for the majority of people. Now, inheritance tax. You pay inheritance tax whenever you receive money as a result of an estate being probated. You also pay it as a result of a gift being given. So anytime you get money that comes into you are subject to paying an inheritance tax, and that's state based, it's not federal. So the state tax in Maryland is 10%. So if you receive $100,000, you're going to pay 10% of that in tax. So that's the bad news, but I told you there's good news too.
Okay.
They too have an exemption. People that are excluded from having to pay inheritance tax. And I'd like to tell people is basically if you're related by blood, you don't have to pay it. So if you're a child and you receive money from a parent, you're not paying inheritance tax. Or grandchild, you're not paying inheritance tax. If you're a brother or a sister, you're not paying inheritance tax.
What about my second cousin?
If you're a parent or grandparent, you're not paying it. So anybody along the lineal line.
Okay.
If you're the next door neighbor or the niece or nephew or the second cousin twice removed, then you're paying inheritance tax.
And it doesn't go in as income tax though, right? It's not based on your income.
No, it's not determined.
It's solely by itself.
It's just a 10% tax on the money that you inherit.
And
But again, most people are going to give their money to family members, to their
Right.
children, to their
Right.
brothers and sisters, to their parents, to their grandparents.
Right.
Okay, So they're not
Understood.
going to have to pay inheritance tax.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I want to close our session today for meeting with both of these gentlemen. We're going to bring it back for episode 2 with more enlightening thoughts and solutions to our problems. So thank you all very much for being with us today.